This is College Matters from the Chronicle. Here's what we know right now. Around midday on Wednesday, Charlie Kirk, a conservative activist, was shot and killed during a speaking engagement at Utah Valley University. Kirk was the founder of Turning Point USA, an influential conservative group that is popular among students on college campuses. Today on the show, I'll talk with my colleague, Nell Gluckman, a senior reporter at the Chronicle of Higher Education, about Kirk's death and what it means for higher ed and the country. Nell, welcome to College Matters.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
So now this is something of an emergency pod. We're recording at 2 o'clock p.m. on Thursday, September 11th, a day after this horrific event. And the situation is still very fluid. There is no shooter in custody right this second. Photos have been released of a person of interest. I think the facts as understood right now will be well known to our listeners. So let's start from the beginning if we can. Who was Charlie Kirk now?
So Charlie Kirk was only 31 years old. He was a married father with two very young children. His wife is Erica Kirk, who's an alumna of Liberty University, where she earned a degree in American Legal Studies. And though Kirk did not graduate from college himself, his rise to political stardom is deeply connected to higher education. He first gained the attention of conservative media back when he was in high school in 2012. At that time, he wrote a letter to Breitbart News pointing out what he viewed as liberal bias in his AP economics textbook. He founded Turning Point USA, his organization that would later become a huge political organization that same year.
You and I have written a little bit about this since this happened, and one of the things that you did some reporting on was Kirk's trajectory professionally. He kind of starts as sort of a known prankster, I think, and then there's an evolution. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so early on, especially when things started to gain some momentum after Trump's election in 2016, his first election, Turning Point started opening chapters on college campuses all over the country. And these chapters were sort of confrontational. They did things like bake sales where they would charge different people different prices for baked goods based on their race, which they saw as a protest of affirmative action policies in admissions. Turning Point was responsible for creating the professor watch list, which in the age of doxing felt like Red Scare tactics to professors. This was a list that was published online of professors, lecturers that Turning Point felt were pushing a too liberal agenda in college classrooms.
Right, and there was wide variation of their alleged sins, as I recall.
Absolutely. You know, some of this turned a bit dark. One professor that we've reported on was harassed and assaulted while coming out of class at Arizona State a few years ago by Turning Point employees or members. More recently, though, the organization has become much more than a campus political organization. Kirk started a PAC. He's been a major fundraiser behind very important get out the vote campaigns for Donald Trump and his candidacy more recently, and has become a real national political figure.
Yeah, he's somebody who I think we perceive as having the White House sort of on speed dial after his death. Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education, referred to him as a friend and an invaluable advisor. We're a long way from the Charlie Kirk of early days.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, what I find interesting, Nell, is that even as he has become, to some degree, part of the Republican establishment, he has still kept these ties to higher education and college campuses. This American Comeback Tour, which rolls through college campuses, that's what he was on when he visited Utah Valley University, where he was shot. This is a public university and community college in Utah, about 40 miles south of Salt Lake City. And one of the things that Kirk was known for, which he was doing at this event, is this Prove Me Wrong table. These are rapid debates over the hottest button issues of the day, kind of an Ask Me Anything format. And what's striking to me now, as somebody who writes and thinks about higher education and college leadership a lot, is that Kirk was doing something, to my mind, that a lot of college leaders would be reluctant to do today, really mixing it up in a very unscripted way with students who might have hostile views toward them. I'm finding, and I don't know if this tracks with your reporting now, but more and more, I'm finding college leadership to just be so cautious about who they talk to. They can control their messaging through other channels, often seem less concerned with traditional media and how to use it. A real retreat in a lot of ways. Now, this isn't for everyone. There are exceptions, of course, but I think that's kind of an interesting point about Charlie Kirk, that he was somebody who was willing to go in front of people. He loved the sport, the repartee, the engagement, the insults even, in back and forth with students. Is that something you've noticed as well?
Yeah, definitely. His videos of these exchanges were a big part of his whole messaging to his community of followers and part of the point he was trying to make. He's sort of one of the original people trying to own the libs. And what better place to find young liberal students who are willing to argue with him than on college campuses.
Did you read Ezra Klein's column today about Kirk?
I did read it, yeah.
I thought this was so interesting now because, Klein is, I think, a leading light of liberalism in the eyes of many. And he wrote, "You can dislike much of what Kirk believed, and the following statement is still true. Kirk was practicing politics in exactly the right way." I've found it somewhat remarkable the degree to which there's been some common ground politically around a figure who, in a lot of ways, I think was seen as a toxic figure on the left. Now, this often happens when people meet tragic ends, common ground is established. But the degree to which people on the left have been talking about Charlie Kirk as something of a pioneer in political engagement is just fascinating to me, given, again, where we started with affirmative action bake sales and things like that were, very much the sort of F your feelings style of politics.
Yeah, I think he's a very quintessential of this time kind of person, both somebody who's willing to engage, but also somebody who was going to push the limits of what the people he was speaking to and speaking in front of felt was acceptable.
We'll have more after the break.
Hi, I'm Fernanda Zamudio Suarez, a producer at College Matters. If you are enjoying the show and want to support us, I hope that you'll follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also leave us a review or invite a friend to listen. At College Matters from the Chronicle, we want to give listeners like you insightful audio journalism about higher education that you won't find anywhere else. By subscribing and spreading the word, you'll help us do just that. Thanks so much for listening.
What, Jack, has been your relationship to Charlie Kirk? Is he someone that you've written a lot about over the years?
Now I started thinking about that last night as you and I were working on sort of the first pass of a story on this. I really haven't written a lot directly about Charlie Kirk, and yet I feel like he has been absolutely ever present in the last 15 years of my coverage of higher education, which I think is significant. I think he has existed as a undeniable force in the conversation we have about colleges and universities in this country and free speech in particular. Even if you're not directly talking about him, he's within the orbit. He's informing the conversation. He's sort of ever-present, omnipresent, even if you aren't writing about him or interviewing with him, which I never had the chance to do. And certainly some of his rhetoric has been on my radar and condemned by people on the left. Many faculty have raised issues about things he said. And I was looking up, some of the greatest hits last night now. And the one that comes up a lot are comments that he made about transgender people. And I wanted to ask you about this actually now. I don't know if you're familiar with the quote, but he described this, quote, transgender thing as so against the natural law and memorably described transgenderism as a throbbing middle finger to God before reading a Bible verse to emphasize this point. It struck me as such a telling example. On one hand, it is the kind of thing that, again, progressives just find so incredibly toxic and infecting of our political rhetoric, but it does something that I think is very Kirkian, if you will. It's subversive, it's provocative, it's offensive, but it's also cloaked in a sort of evangelical, well, not even sort of, it is cloaked in an evangelical rhetoric that is palatable to conservatives of a certain age. And that's something that I saw Kirk doing, was bridging the gap between, he's a 31-year-old now, he's a millennial, he's born in the early 90s. And to me, that comment is kind of saying, hey, I'm still speaking in this Reaganite language, if you will, about natural law and what's acceptable, abominations of God. But I'm going a little further. I'm going a little edgier, and I'm telling people, this is where the party's headed. We're still people of God. We still go to church, but we're a little lewd. We're a little transgressive. We adopt this F your feelings sort of Trumpian ethos. What do you make of that? That he was sort of bridging two political eras?
Yeah, I think he was trying to make these views that a lot of people find completely offensive and degrading kind of seem young and cool. I think there's been a lot of reporting on that being his explicit message, to bring the Trump style of politics and the views that the Trump team and campaign and presidencies have
kind of make it cool, right?
And bring it to younger people.
You know, the other thing about him relative to higher education now is that I spoke a couple of weeks ago with Chris Rufo. He's a conservative activist as well. He's had a lot of things to say in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death. When I talked to Chris Rufo about higher education, who's very critical of higher education in many ways, you know, there's a lot of common ground with Charlie Kirk in that regard. But Rufo would say, I do not see higher education as a scourge on society. I see it as an institution that has lost its way. In its ideal form, this is an institution that brings about the better angels of society. It's just doing a miserable job of it. I'm not an expert on Kirk's philosophy, but in terms of his public statements, I think that he's a little different. I think that he has talked about college as a scam. He has talked about it as a deceptive force that is sort of hoodwinking people. That's, to me, quite different than saying this is a politically out-of-touch institution that's salvageable if we change it just enough. It feels like it was more of a scorched earth approach.
I think in some ways he may have been trying to make students feel more confident in thinking and saying these things that on their campuses would have been considered offensive or outrageous. These are students that agree with him or align with him politically. And I think that has had a lasting effect on the discourse on college campuses. He's set up professors, liberal professors, as the enemy, and that these are people who are going to get in the way of the students' free expression.
Definitely. It feels like it's sort of a permission slip to say whatever you want. And of course, at the same time, Kirk is out there telling the students, you really shouldn't be here to begin with. College is a joke. We actually have a clip of him saying something like that. Let's listen to it.
Let's talk about the institution itself. So everyone in the audience here, how many of you have had to take classes that are a waste of time that you wish you didn't have to take, that are a waste of money, and that every single hand goes up? Look around, look around, look around, no, look around. They're scamming every kid in this audience. They are forcing them to take classes that make them poorer, that take up their time in order to get the credential. That is an institutional scam. And by the way, every other part of life is all about your own customization, your Netflix account, how you get your burrito bowl, from how you dress, your Amazon cart is you are in charge. But you come to college and they say you must go take these 3, 4, 5 classes that are very expensive, especially for you out-of-state students, to go further into debt, study things that don't matter, to find jobs that don't exist.
So now there's a little bit of background noise there, I realize, but I think the classic Kirk comes through in there. What do you make of it?
I think at this point it's kind of a mainstream argument that college is too expensive and maybe some parts of it aren't worth it. We saw a lot of that argument from multiple people across the political spectrum in the last few elections. What I've been thinking about, what's interesting to me is I've been looking back at some of our old coverage of Turning Point in the earlier years. In 2017, we wrote about his effort and Turning Point's effort to fund student government elections. And one of the things that he said, according to our story, was, we're not going to change professors' minds and we're not going to get professors fired, but we're going to operate more on the margins, and we can retake student government. But now, of course, professors are being fired in connection with liberal ideas. Just this week, a lecturer was fired at Texas A&M. The administration says it wasn't because of what the professor was talking, but some sort of misalignment between what the syllabus said and what the professor was saying. But the student—
And this is a lecturer who was teaching a children's lit course, but was accused of talking about gender ideology.
Right. One of the students in the class accused the professor of that. So, now we're in a world where that is a reality, that professors are getting fired for things that they say and have been accused of by their students of saying, which even Kirk didn't think was going to happen back in 2017. I've been wrestling with what this all adds up to, and I'm curious what you think, Jack. We started talking about this last night, but I'm wondering now, a day in, what you make of the significance of it all.
There's a few ways I would come at that now. I mean, one is, obviously, this is just a profound tragedy for Charlie Kirk and his family. As you mentioned at the top, he's married with 2 young children. One can't imagine. I remember just yesterday when this all came down, I was driving to pick up my son from middle school, and I was surprised at the degree to which it really rattled me. I think that says something about the perilous moment that we're living in, and how this event seems to verify that this is a tough time to live in this country.
Yeah.
There are also, if you think about Kirk, there are, I think, far-reaching consequences anytime there's a deeply symbolic event in any society. I talked to Peter Lake yesterday, who's a law professor at Stetson, and he told me a martyr is born today. Lake's a guy who's always good with a quote, but in this particular circumstance, it's hard to argue with him. And so I've been thinking about, what do we do with martyrs? They're forces that move societies. I mean, that's what history shows us. And so it's entirely possible that Kirk's influence in death could be more profound than it was in life. There are people who saw him as very much an ascendant figure within the conservative movement, and I don't want to diminish at all where he might have gone or he's still alive, but I do think that his power as a symbol is significant and deeply important at a time when there is just a huge debate going on in this country about what is the role of colleges and universities and higher education within society. I mean, you and I have been covering this long enough, Nell, to know that, now we're seeing major news outlets every day having story upon story upon story about what the Trump administration is doing with higher education. We're at the epicenter of this storm over what kind of country this is going to be. And this seems like just the catalytic event in the middle of it. When I talked to Peter Lake, he said, you're going to see Charlie Kirk Centers for Constructive Dialogue starting to pop up on college campuses. I would have found that just phenomenally unlikely a few years ago, that this sort of young pugilistic person was going to be held up as the emblem of free speech, the emblem of what the Republican Party stands for. All of those things now seem possible, if not likely. Lawmakers are going to have something to say about this. And if I can just say one last thing on this front, the differentiator here to me is that this is an unambiguous example of really the ultimate speaker cancellation, and I don't mean that in a flip way at all. But if you think about what Charlie Kirk has been saying for much of his public life, it's that conservatives don't have a place on college campuses. And we have a lot of debates over who does and doesn't get to speak. But historically, we've been writing about whether a speaker gets invited somewhere and shouted down. This is just categorically different. And the fact that not only did it happen, but it's happening in a way that people can see with their own eyes in very graphic videos that, quite frankly, I have avoided, to me suggests the staying power of this is, quite frankly, beyond my own comprehension at this stage. So it strikes me as a seminal event in certainly in this generation as it relates to higher education and maybe even to the country. What do you think about it? I mean, I've gone pretty big there with my thoughts on it, I think, now. But just looking at higher ed maybe specifically, is Charlie Kirk a person, in your view, who will have a lasting effect on the sector?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like you said, I think it's very significant that it happened on a college campus while he was doing the thing that he had always set out to do and that he claimed was unwelcome there. I'll be interested to see what that means for college campuses debates going forward, if this galvanizes people to keep having them or makes security such a deep concern that it's no longer something that can happen. I think in the more immediate term, we're going to see a really higher education, college campuses is really tense places for a lot of reasons following this event. We know already today there's been reporting that a number of campuses, including a number of historically Black colleges, have received threats and were in lockdown. And, we don't know why yet, but definitely feels like higher education is on edge. I think there may be and already have been people fired over things that they've said about Charlie Kirk online, people on college campuses. And then longer term, I think it's harder to say and more complicated, but I definitely think he has helped shape the conversation about how we and how especially young students, especially young conservative students, think about the value of college and that he has shaped how we think about higher education's role in society.
Well, it's a lot to think about now, and I appreciate you coming in today and talking with me about it, helping me process it a little bit. And thank you so much for your work with me yesterday on reporting on this. We'll link to that in our show notes, but we'll be back to talk more about this. But for now, I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much, Nell.
Thanks, Jack.
College Matters from the Chronicle is a production of the Chronicle of Higher Education, the nation's leading independent newsroom covering colleges. If you like the show, please leave us a review or invite a friend to listen. And remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. You can find an archive of every episode, all of our show notes, and much more at chronicle.com/College Matters. If you like, drop us a note at collegematters@chronicle.com. We are produced by Rococo Punch. Our Chronicle producer is Fernanda Zamudio Suarez. Our podcast artwork is by Cottrell Thomas. Special thanks to our colleagues Brock Reed, Sarah Brown, Carmen Mendoza, Ron Coddington, Joshua Hatch, and all of the people at the Chronicle who make this show possible. I'm Jack Stripling. Thanks for listening.